I actually want to put this New York Times article up on the screen from today about how, or it's from the last couple of days, about how Gen Z is, quote, resurrecting the 1990s. We end up talking a lot about generational differences on this show. And part of the reason for that is because I actually think it's one of the least appreciated parts of our politics and our culture. And it's not like there aren't a million headlines about Gen Z and millennials every single day. But what I mean by that being underappreciated, the storyline being underappreciated, is that these generational markers are happening faster and more furious than they ever have in human history. So a generation, of 20 years, let's say, or 30 years, 300 years ago, the generational differences were not as significant as, the fact that, let's say, my brother is 4 years younger than me. He had a completely different experience with smartphones and social media than I did. I got into high school, 2007? So he got into high school in 2011. Kids had smartphones in high school in 2011. I didn't have a smartphone until I was in college. And what was on those smartphones in 2011? Twitter, Instagram, social media, Facebook, all of it was there. And that is just a hugely significant change. Well, what about people 4 years younger than him, 8 years younger than him? Well, they're on TikTok, and TikTok completely changed the advertising industry. It completely changed everything. And it's not been here with us for a decade. So one of the reasons that I like to focus on these stories is that they are just they're happening so fast and furious that they're creating these really salient, rigid differences between generations that I think we forget how quickly some of this stuff has happened. So in this story about Gen Z, I'm actually going to put it up on the screen. We don't need to look at Jack Schlossberg's YouTube channel anymore, although he is technically a millennial. He's my age. He was born in 1993. But here is the New York Times article. They say, working together, the author who engaged in a survey says, working together, we explore Gen Z's views of pre-digital cultural products, media, hobbies, and traditions. The resulting analysis done last year found that members of Gen Z appear to be mining the past to enrich their present lives, especially by fostering a greater appreciation for offline living. Now, I saw this story in the New York Times and found it really to be an important landmark, because I went on Ezra Klein's podcast last year, and we were talking about the new right and some of the differences between the new right and the old right. What's driving young conservatives to this new conservative brand? What's driving them towards MAGA? What's driving them towards what a lot of people on the left would probably describe as reactionary politics? I think that's probably accurate on some level. But the bigger conversation that we started last week about why young people are flocking to Latin Mass in the Catholic Church. Why are young people going to more traditionalist services? And it's in some ways because this just description here of pre-digital culture, you can see it. You can see it. Never before has any generation had so much access to videos of their parents, pictures of their parents, of their grandparents. Just think about that. To the world, to geopolitics over the last 100 years. That stacks on top of itself. I've probably mentioned this bitterly before, but music nerds, let's say you're, in your 60s, music nerds in your 60s, rattling off, everything that they were listening to when they were 20. And I'm like, man, yeah, you could listen to all of that because, mass production and mass music broadcasting had been around for 30 years at that point, or 40 years at that point. And it stacks, it grows. And so if you are, millennial, or if you're Gen Z, you have nearly 100 years of this of this to work with. And that does heighten the sensation of nostalgia, of course, because you actually just have more to look at. And the pictures that we've preserved, for some really good reasons, are rosier ones, right? And we all know rose-colored lenses, we get it. All of that is real. We also have some really ugly pictures from conflicts from the Great Depression, from civil rights, and all of that. But when I was on the Ezra Klein show last year, I was thinking, I said this, Gen Z is binging nostalgia videos. They're binging videos of what it was like to be in high school in the 1990s or 2000s on YouTube and TikTok and whatever else. And I remember some people asking me for proof of that. I was like, talk to Gen Z, ask them if they're doing it. They are. And part of it is that it's fascinating. It's even interesting for me to see what high school looked like in the 1990s, though, or in the 1980s, I should say, because in the 1990s, it looked really similar to what it looked like to me in the 2000s. And that is just so different now. These things are changing so quickly that if you were in high school in the 2010s, the 2020s look so different in a way that didn't happen before. But now there's just so much content to watch, to pine after, to learn from, I suppose you could say, in a good way. But it's quite interesting that Gen Z, and this New York Times piece has some numbers on it, say that they have a lot of problems. Like, why go to CDs? Why go to vinyl? Why go to physical books? Why go to board games? This is a Times saying consumer trends suggest that many members of Gen Z yearn for a taste of the pre-digital era. Why would that be? Well, the story also cites surveys. 2023 survey conducted by the Harris Poll in partnership with his research team. The author's research team found that 80% of Gen Z adults, people born after 1997, were worried that their generation was too dependent on technology. 75% were concerned about social media's impact on young people's mental health. And 58% said that new technologies were more likely to drive people apart than bring them together. As a researcher who specializes in the psychology of nostalgia, I was struck by one finding in particular, the author writes. 60% of Gen Z adults said they wished they could return to a time before everyone was plugged in. 60% of Gen Z adults said they wished they could return to a time before everyone was plugged in. That is a profound indictment on the world that our children are inheriting, because there is no mass movement right now to make that experience possible. There are some people who have written, John Haidt obviously covers this closely. There are some people, Claire Morrell, others who have written really good books on this topic for phone-free childhoods, for example. But there has been no reckoning about anything as it pertains to genuinely changing the way that we relate to each other, that the world works, and how these technologies have been integrated into everything for adults, right? There's a lot of talk about kids, but Gen Z is not 5 years old. Gen Z is not 8 years old. We're not worried about Gen Z getting their first iPad at this point. We're beyond that. Gen Z is in the workforce, and they wish they could go to a time before everyone was plugged in. Majority of them wish they could go to a time before everyone was, quote, plugged in. And you know what? That comes with a little bit of credibility, because they didn't live it, but they're seeing it. They're seeing it all around them, and they're seeking it out. They want to know what that looks like. And this happened, if you lived through it, it happened so quickly. We're frogs in the proverbial boiling pot. One day, you didn't have, maybe you had a beeper, or you had a BlackBerry. But one day, basically, or one decade, you could go on vacation and your office would have to ring you at the hotel and leave a voicemail telling you to call. And you wouldn't get that until after you came back from the beach or after you were out on a hike or whatever. Now, how hard is it to put your phone down for a hike when the best news or the worst news of your entire life is just a split second away at any given moment? It is just the dopamine refresher of pulling up your phone and checking those notifications. And it could be, again, the worst news of your life. It could be the best news of your life. Someone you love, something could have happened to. Randomly, someone could have, discovered you, or offered you a better job, offered you a raise. Those are the things that we get in emails. Those are the things that we get in Slack messages. Those are Facebook. Instagram, all of those things are always at a moment's reach in your pocket. And we barely think about the way that's rewired our brains to constantly be faced with crisis, chaos, let alone the implications of the globe shrinking to the point where you are bombarded constantly with images of peril or propaganda from the other side of the world, and then asked, because of the way the algorithm reshaped our political discourse, to have an opinion on it. Over the years, I have been clear about this. I am not just pro-birth, I am pro-life, and being pro-life means standing with mothers not only before their baby is born, but long after. And that is exactly why I partner very proudly with Preborn. Preborn doesn't just save babies, they make motherhood abundantly possible. They provide free ultrasounds and share the truth of the gospel with women in crisis, and then they stay with real practical help, including financial support for up to 2 years after the baby is born. Incredible. This is what true Christ-centered compassion looks like, not just for the baby, but for the mother too. And here's where you can make a difference, a huge difference. Just $28 provides a free life-saving ultrasound. One chance for a mother to see her baby. And when she does, she is twice as likely to choose life. Amazing. Preborn is trying to save 70,000 babies this year. So don't just say you're pro-life, live it. Help save babies and support mothers today. Go to preborn.com/Emily or call 855-601-2229. That's preborn.com/Emily.